Be discussing using applied behavior and analytic strategies, or ABA strategies, to improve performance for staff and employees. To start off, I am Daniel Childress. I am a board-certified behavior analyst and the site director of Hope Autism Clinic in O'Fallon, Illinois. I have been in the field of applied behavior analysis for about 14 years. I got my start in the field of ABA working as a registered behavior technician. I started working with young adults and teenagers in home, providing direct ABA services, and then went and got my master's in applied behavior analysis at Lindenwood University. Following that, about 3 years ago, I moved into a site director position, and I have been in that management role for the last 3 years. So at my site, I have about 3 BCBAs that are under me. I have 32 RBTs that report to me and 3 practicum students. I already mentioned that. And then for fun, I like to hike, I like to read, I like to travel. I've been attempting to learn Italian. I'm very bad at it, but I'm attempting. And I like to camp and bake. So today's topic I wanted to discuss, since ABA might be kind of a new field to some of you here, I wanted to start off with just kind of giving a brief introduction into applied behavior analysis, or ABA. So applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is a science focused on understanding and improving behavior. And we can really do this as a broad, this is a really broad kind of encompassing field, and we can really look at quite a few different behaviors. We focus on evidence-based techniques to teach new skills, reduce undesirable behaviors. Often ABA is used in the treatment of autism in educational settings, but it can also be applied in organizational settings. And that's kind of going to be today's topic of how we can use those in the workplace. We're focused on data-driven strategies, so we want to be able to track what we're doing and how it impacts that behavior. And we are really advocates for positive reinforcement, or utilizing rewards and motivation. So to kind of start, I was talking about how broad the behaviors can be used and the diagnoses and environments. To name a few, I have worked in home, in clinic, in schools on my own, and as well as residential. ABA has been shown to be effective across behaviors, so behaviors of that of individuals with autism, but also the workplace behaviors, as I mentioned. It's very prevalent in the treatment of autism, specifically with challenging behaviors like physical aggression, elopement, self-injurious behaviors, at reducing and replacing those behaviors. So with that in mind, we can kind of think about those negative workplace behaviors that we might see and how we can replace those behaviors with new, more appropriate skills. A lot of times we're teaching communication, social skills, play skills, or work skills. However, ABA has been shown to be effective well beyond that of the world of autism. So to kind of name a few, I have pulled a few recent articles to kind of show how ABA has in recent years been used beyond that of the world of autism. So this article shows how we can evaluate feedback frequency and preference on task performance, so looking at the quality of work. This next study shows the use of social validity of digital social incentives for the use of substance use disorders. So those two kind of show very different kind of sides of ABA. This article shows the use of teaching individuals with autism self-advocacy skills to reduce bullying. Another study shows the use of cash incentives to increase step counts, so really addressing like things like exercise and that kind of thing as well. Remediation of picture text problem for learners exhibiting reading deficits. So this kind of really shows kind of the range of a few just recent studies. However, today we are going to be focusing on how ABA can be applied in the workplace, specifically looking at staff performance. So we're going to focus on the use of reinforcement, feedback, and shaping to enhance those workplace behaviors. We're also going to focus on practical strategies to improve efficiency, accuracy, and overall job satisfaction of our team. And then I'm also going to provide some discussion on real-world scenarios from my own work experience and the team I supervise in O'Fallon. So to start, I kind of want to get a read of the room and kind of get to know you all better to kind of be able to lean into that experience that you have. By a quick show of hands, who currently is working as a supervisor or a manager or a trainer in some capacity? Oh, perfect. So like the majority of you guys have people that report to you. That's great. If I can get, even a couple of people to volunteer some common obstacles or difficulties that you face in the workplace. That would kind of give me a good idea of kind of issues that you face on the day-to-day. Any volunteers? Doesn't have to be anything major. Phone use in the workplace, tracking data, perfect. Accepting feedback, that's a big one for sure. Follow through, yeah. And then I think you had a hand as well, no? Yeah. Timeliness? Yeah, that's definitely a big problem. I feel like we can all agree those are very common threads in the workplace, for sure. So hopefully after today's talk, you will have some kinds of insights and new approaches that you can look to address some of those behaviors. So some key ABA strategies for improving staff performance. I cannot attest enough. Reinforcement is really the gold standard when we're looking at addressing behaviors. So really what that involves is rewarding or encouraging behaviors that we would like to see more of. So reinforcement strengthens behavior by following the desired behavior with something that we would like that person to do. So sometimes this feels a little counterintuitive if we're wanting to get staff performance up, like, well, you're already getting paid for it, you should do it. But sometimes we can do arbitrary reinforcers to further improve and address those behavioral concerns. There's two main types of reinforcement that I kind of want to chat about. The first being positive reinforcement. That is the very classic example of reinforcement. So it is following something that the person does with a reward. So this could be a praise, it could be a bonus, it could be you buying that person lunch. You're adding something after that person does the behavior we want them to do. The other type of reinforcement that we have in the world of ABA and psychology is negative reinforcement. And this one, a lot of times people hear negative and they think something bad. It is not associated with anything bad, it's associated with the removal. So when I think negative, I think minus, something is being removed. So you're removing something that the person does not like in order to further improve or continue that behavior. So a lot of times, an example of this, I have a staff member in O'Fallon who we have had some kind of hiccups and issues with over the years. So I'm providing follow-ups weekly with that person. However, as performance improves, those meetings would become less often, right? So the removal of that meeting would serve as a negative reinforcer for that person because they wouldn't have to meet with me weekly. Like, hopefully I'm not that aversive, but that's kind of those two main reinforcement contingencies. We can further subdivide that into four main categories. So whenever I'm thinking about workplace behavior or client behavior, there are four functions or purposes of challenging behavior. The first being attention. Does this person do that behavior because it results in attention or reaction from someone else? Does this person do this behavior to get access to an item? Are they doing this behavior because they get something that they want, essentially? Escape is a very common workplace behavior. Are they doing the behavior to escape or avoid something that they don't like? A lot of times escape will happen if tasks are challenging or difficult, or the person doesn't know how to successfully do them. They might engage in escape or avoidant behavior. Think scrolling Instagram when you should be working on a project or those types of things. And the last is really looking at automatic reinforcement. So those are things that feel good to the person to do. So that a lot of times when I'm thinking or explaining this to others, I'm thinking scratching a bug bite, twirling your hair, biting your nails. You don't do those because of a reaction from other people. You're not trying to avoid anything or get anything. It just feels good to do. Reinforcement applications in the workplace. So provide immediate and behavior-specific feedback when procedures are followed correctly. So when we can catch our staff doing what we want them to do, that is going to further encourage that behavior in the future. So I kind of call it catch them being good. You catch that person on task or doing whatever activity we were wanting to see more of. But furthermore, we want to be specific with our praise. Comments like good job or you did it, that doesn't tell the person what we want them to do more of. So we want to be specific with our praise. And sometimes this cannot feel like the most organic thing, but comments like great work today responding quickly to your email or managing that difficult situation with a family. If we can be as specific as possible in our feedback, that tells the person what they should be doing and will encourage them to do more of that behavior. Another example of a reinforcement application would be the use of incentive programs to improve accuracy and efficiency. I know a couple of you all had mentioned like data collection errors, timeliness, reports being done on time. If we can utilize and capitalize on reinforcement and the use of incentive programs, this can really help improve those deadlines, help improve that performance. So these programs should be individualized and catered to your employees and what is motivating to your own team. So I'll talk about that a little bit more further, but that kind of introduces some strategies of how we can apply reinforcement in the workplace. Another strategy that's important is recognizing employees in team meetings to boost morale. So I've always done like an employee of the month in O'Fallon, but recently I have pivoted from me being the person that chooses the employee of the month to having my technicians and employees recognize one of their own. So this kind of allows them to kind of see like, hey, this person's been really working hard, or they've made a lot of big strides. And then not only do I take that information and like identify who has the most votes, but I use that and I put all of that information into our team meeting of like, this person was recognized for this person was recognized for that. And it can really be motivating and kind of cool for the team to see that they were nominated by one of their peers. Another thing to think about when we're thinking about reinforcement. Reinforcement should always be individualized and catered to the person's personal preferences. So when we're doing ABA in the workplace or with clients with autism, it should always be individualized to that person and what is motivating or important to them. So when I'm thinking about the workplace, what works in my work might not work in your workplace because that's a completely different dynamic and group of people. So it's important to kind of note those individual preferences and workplace culture and what will be advantageous and efficient in that place. So for instance, coffee and candy and public praise for some people might be motivating. For other people, public praise could be really embarrassing and aversive. So really kind of figuring out what is motivating and taking the time to get to know your individual team. So kind of a discussion point here. Thinking about your own team that you manage, what are some things that you have identified as a manager that are motivating or potentially reinforcing for your team? For my team, food is a very big motivator. My clinical team, which I'll talk about more later, they work every month basically for Qdoba. I will buy them Qdoba lunch, and they would do just about anything for Qdoba lunch. Yeah.
One of the things that seems to have worked for us is filling our fridge.
Sure.
Like they put the items that they like on there.
Yeah. Just to repeat that in case anyone couldn't hear, she was saying that filling the fridge with, sounds like snacks and drinks and those types of things. Are you doing that non-contingently, so it's not dependent on behavior at this time?
It's contingent.
Okay, so they have to earn that reinforcer. Perfect. And just in case anyone's not familiar with that, non-contingent would mean like I'm just putting things in the fridge. You don't have to do anything different. Contingent would mean that you would have to meet a certain contingency, or you would have to like engage in certain behaviors to earn that. Perfect.
We did it for no same-day call-offs.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think call-offs are a really big issue a lot of times across fields. Perfect. Any other kinds of things that you've noted as a reinforcer or rewards in your workplace? Yeah. No, I think that's a great example. In case anyone couldn't hear that, earning a monthly bonus. I think that's quite literally putting your money where your mouth is. So it's, not only setting that expectation, but we're rewarding that with more money, which I feel like we could all use more of that sometimes. Perfect. I'll take one more if anyone's interested. Sure. Yeah. No, I love that. If you couldn't hear her in the back, it was, they have a treasure box with pens and lotions and different kinds of things. Do not underestimate the value of a good pen. I have people at my workplace that would do a lot of things to get a pen. So perfect. Cool. And I think it's really cool that you guys are already starting to think about those things and how we can motivate our team. So this is kind of another strategy that we can utilize. This is really when I'm using task analyses. I'm thinking about those tasks that are hard for that person to do. Is this something that involves a lot of steps? It's very involved, and that person might struggle with those types of things. So task analyses essentially are breaking up larger tasks into smaller teachable steps. So rather than asking someone to complete a large project, we can break that into small chunks that are easier to complete, and the person is more likely to be successful. So an example, training a new hire on documentation procedures by breaking the process into step-by-step sequences. So a lot of times, one of the data collection softwares we use is CentralReach. So essentially, that is not the most intuitive website to use. I'm sure all of you have your own CentralReach equivalent that is not maybe the most user-friendly for a new person. And that can be a learning curve, especially if you haven't used that type of website. So having like clear instructions that are broken step by step can make that individual much more successful and likely to succeed. So in addition to that, providing those written checklists and visual aids with step-by-step training can make that a lot easier. But looking at our training process, so I really have kind of like a 5-step process when I'm providing training to someone. So first, I want to provide a written description of the skill. So that's going to be providing an explanation of like, this is what I'm wanting you to do, and here's kind of a step-by-step process. The next thing I want to do is model that skill. So this is something that I should also be able to do, and I can fluently do this skill. So I can show the person how they can do it themselves, and they've had that visual. I'm a very visual person myself, so being able to see someone else do it successfully makes it easier for me myself to do it. The next step is allowing the learner to practice. So depending on what skill you're teaching, this could be with the client that we're talking about, this could be in role play with you, but allowing that person to practice that skill is really advantageous so they can kind of feel that discomfort or kind of see where those obstacles might be. The next is sometimes I think where we kind of drop the ball on, providing that specific feedback in the moment. So capturing, hey, you did a really great job with X, Y, or Z, but here are those components that I would like to see improvement with. And that can feel uncomfortable when you're providing feedback like that, but really emphasizing the alternatives of what I want that person to do instead in those moments. And repeating steps 4 and 5 as needed. So we could go through those steps continuously if needed until the person was showing fluency with those skills. And then over time, we can slowly fade out that level of support. So kind of my activity, are there any large tasks that you can think of in your own workplace that you have struggled with teaching a new hire or a trainee? Online training, yes, definitely. Like how to use it or what like aspect of that?
To access it in general, like, because we've changed so much. We've had different platforms.
Sure.
And then now it's all in one, and so to get everybody.
No, and just to repeat that in case anyone didn't hear, essentially online training and the obstacles that can present with that. With changing softwares and people acclimating to that. I feel like technological difficulties can be something like, depending on people's own technical literacy, there can be some big discrepancies there. Any other kind of common tasks that have been hard to teach? Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So writing objective, clear session notes. So that is a perfect example of providing written examples. Whenever I'm providing training, I try to provide lots of exemplars of what we should do and what would not be a good quality session note. But that's a great example. So I'm going to take us through a fun example that has nothing to do with our day-to-day lives. We're going to talk about baking a cake. So that is something, if you are not a baker, is going to be a lot of steps. There's a lot that can go wrong in it. I think we've all baked something probably at some point in our career, and it's, fallen short. So thinking about baking a cake, if you have never baked a cake or never done anything like in the kitchen at all, that is going to involve tons of steps. I mean, depending on what type of cake, that could be 20, 30 different steps. So we want to break that down, and really a kind of nice visual for this is breaking that into steps. So I think this is a really good example of a quality task analysis because not only does it break it into sequential steps, but there is also a visual component. So if we're thinking about things like online training or completing good session notes, if we had those visual components and break it down individually to those steps, that makes it a lot more digestible instead of, okay, I've got to go do this, big lofty thing. So we can really do that across the board with all kinds of things. But this kind of strategy really can be catered and individualized. Important things when we are creating a task analysis. So if I'm creating a task analysis for baking a cake, or I'm creating one for a new hire in the workplace, or I'm creating one for a client, the most important thing to do is you yourself go through the steps of what is needed to do that behavior. So then as you're doing that, you take out your notepad or your computer and you would list out each step in that process. And a lot of times you're gonna miss a step if you don't actually go do the behavior yourself. So it's really important to take the time to fluently do that behavior or watch someone that knows how to do that behavior so that you can track and create a step-by-step process so that you can teach other people. So as that last example shows, we can take a really challenging or complex set of behaviors like making a cake and break it into small digestible sets. Task analyses, like I was saying, can really be catered to anything in your own workplace. But really important takeaway, if you're creating a task analysis, it's really important to make sure that you do that set of behaviors yourself so that you can fluently get that and list everything out that is involved in that process. So another strategy that's really important that I kind of touched on earlier is utilizing feedback with performance. So feedback is really important for helping shape behavior. And a lot of times we do not have the same expectation for someone on day 1 in the workplace as we do on day 60. So a lot of times we're gradually shaping their behavior over time to get closer to our terminal objective or our end goal. So it's really important to be specific when we're providing feedback. I really can't attest that enough. We want to make sure that we're providing the most specific information to that person of what they're doing well or what we want them to change about their behavior. And always emphasizing what we want to do instead. So in ABA, this would be called a replacement behavior. So if you have a staff that is gossiping in the workplace, rather than just being like, don't do that, you can talk about those types of things outside of the workplace. If you have someone that's using their phone in the workplace, rather than immediately telling them no, not that we wouldn't use discipline, but really highlighting when that would be appropriate to do instead. It's vital for staff to know what they are doing well and what areas of behavior we want to see change or improvement in some aspect. So feedback is something that I do every single day with my employees, catching what they're doing well. And that's even like if I'm doing, supervision time with that person, or I'm just walking down the hallway and I see them handling a situation well. Or maybe they're not handling it well and I kind of provide that coaching and guidance. So do's and don'ts of feedback. Feedback should be immediate. It should be specific and it should be constructive. So rather than saying something like great job, I want to avoid generic statements. Something like good job, that person has no idea necessarily what they did a good job at. So that's not necessarily going to lead to more of the workplace behaviors and the culture that we want to foster, because maybe they just did something that we don't want them to do and they're pairing that with good job and they're going to do that negative behavior. So avoiding generic statements can avoid that kind of loophole. We want to be specific as much as possible. So rather than saying something like good job, you could say, I love how you responded to that email with the customer about this issue. Statements like this allow the person to know what they did well and what kinds of things we want them to keep doing in the future. So that can further encourage and reinforce those types of behaviors. We want to balance corrective and positive feedback. So we don't want to be toxically positive of like, you're always doing amazing, I love that, because that's not constructive and that person's not learning with that either. But we also don't want to be the person that is always punitive and coming in and telling you how bad you're doing, because we've all had that boss that every time they came around, you're like, oh geez, this is not going to be good. So finding that balance of both catching what they're doing well and providing that constructive or coaching feedback. So it sometimes can be hard to find a balance because you don't want to come across as like toxically positive and you don't want to be the jerk boss. So kind of striking that balance at times can be a challenge, especially with a new hire where there might be more obstacles than appropriate. So maybe starting small of like, hey, you did a great job cleaning up today. Maybe that's our starting point and we can shape from there. Being mindful of what is important to the person to improve on first. So Like I was saying earlier, my expectations for someone on their first week of work is going to be very different than when they've been with the company for quite some time. So what is most important for them to get successful at quickly, and what is something that we can teach later on? Rome was not built in a day, and our staff aren't going to be perfect immediately either. So really thinking about how we can slowly shape that behavior over time and slowly improve that. I had a staff recently who, when they started, I was kind of like, maybe I made the wrong choice with hiring this person, because they weren't interacting with the clients in a way that I thought was as organic of interactions. But over time, in some coaching, we were able to provide feedback to that person of, hey, here's how you can like play and interact and create learning opportunities with this client. And we've seen a lot of growth with this person who I was initially pretty skeptical of. So that, I think that can kind of show you over time we can kind of shape and teach and those micro behaviors over time. Another thing I kind of wanted to touch on, I think a lot of times in American culture, we grew up with the feedback sandwich. I'm sure we all had to do it in elementary school at some point. Research actually shows the feedback sandwich is not beneficial, which is, I guess, not surprising because the last takeaway is that positive. So the person leaves and they're like, well, I did good. And a lot of times that the meat or the actual critique can kind of just feel like a filler. And that person maybe won't take that as seriously as they should. So we want to make sure that we're providing the feedback fluently when we are catching that so that that person can know what they can improve upon or can change. Another really important strategy to keep in mind with feedback is building quality and authentic relationships with your team. You don't need to be best friends with your team members. You don't have to go to every happy hour and know everything about these people, but it is important to have a good relationship and dynamic. I know for me personally, if I have a better relationship with my team, it's easier to provide that feedback. I think if you know the person and know what's important to them, I think it's easier to coach and guide and support. So I really can't attest enough the importance of building rapport amongst your supervisees. I think sometimes we can feel like it's arbitrary, but it really is important that our team knows that they can trust us and rely on us. So I make it a rule of thumb that I know a little bit about everyone. So if I've got someone that's getting married, I know, the details of some of their wedding event coming up. Or if I have someone that has a child, I kind of know like, oh yeah, they've got a birthday coming up. How did that go? That you're showing the investment in the person beyond your worker. Because I think we've also all had that boss that it's just like they thought of us as just someone that was clocking in and out. You went home at the end of the day and I don't care about you beyond that. And we don't want our team to feel like that. And also, the better relationship that you have with that person, it makes those hard conversations a lot easier. That you can kind of meet with that person and go, hey, I've known you for quite some time. This is not something that like I necessarily expected from you. And you can have those open conversations more easily. When we can, utilizing objective data to track performance trends. So if we can get data on what we're trying to improve, if that's session notes or if that is timeliness, we can collect data on that rather than being like, hey, you just didn't do X, Y, or Z. So we can present that data to the person and talk through that of what might be concerning and really evaluate the effectiveness of the strategies we're using. Using data can also depersonalize the feedback, so it becomes more about the work rather than the person. For example, in my own workplace, I have used meeting billable quotas as a data collection system. So every week, I track how many billable hours each of my BCBAs is meeting, and that's one of the metrics that I use to achieve our reinforcer. Another thing which I think ties to kind of note conversion that I've heard some of you talk about is note conversion is due every Friday by 4:45. And setting these expectations and collecting data on these has really helped kind of mitigate some of those obstacles. Yeah, and rather than like being perceived as a character flaw of like you're dropping the ball, it becomes you didn't meet this expectation and we can track data on that. Kind of reiterating on feedback. So feedback and data collection, when we're providing that in data sheets and we can present graphed data to the person, this can further show where those areas of difficulty might be. Spending time with the person when they should be engaging in the behavior of concern is really important because we can catch in the moment where those difficulties might be. And sometimes it could be something really simple. If we're noticing common issues with data collection or using a software, if we're there to support the person through that, sometimes we can provide some like easy insights of, hey, this actually would make your job a lot easier if you try X, Y, or Z. And that can also cue opportunities to respond, help the person respond, and provide reinforcement when they're doing it correctly. Other kind of things to discuss with feedback, implementing self-monitoring tools. So if we can teach the person to monitor their own behavior, they can start to kind of catch when they are doing the behavior correctly or when they need to change something about their behavior. So I have a staff who has kind of used some strategies that I would not like them to utilize in the workplace to gain client attention. So I provided a booster training on other strategies that they can utilize. And we're starting to have that person capture on their own of like, okay, this is when I handle this correctly, or I need to change something about what I'm doing. This can also be timeliness to emails. You can have the person have every week on their calendar that they're checking, have I caught up on my emails? Am I meeting my deadlines? Am I hitting my billable expectations? Or whatever might be individually important to your own workplace. Other strategies, creating a video model can be helpful, or peer reviews, like pairing a senior employee with a newer employee can help create those kind of supportive workplace environments and help your team foster a supportive workplace culture. Creating a video example of someone doing the task fluently can also be a really good resource to have available for your team. And it's something that you don't have to recreate. So if you have, staff turnover and you have a new employee begin, you have that video from the last time. So it's basically you're kind of getting more for your time. Feedback discussion. So I would like you all to reflect on a time that you gave feedback or received feedback and how it affected either your own performance or the person's performance. Doesn't need to be anything like devastating or traumatic, but something small. I'll start off with an example and see if that cues any. So I had a staff member, one of my manager level staff, who had a technician that was on their team, and they had a pretty volatile relationship. So this BCBA, great BCBA, it was a newer employee, and they weren't feeling like this person was changing their behavior. And in the end, both of the employees ended up coming to me and complaining about the other. So I was kind of in a lose-lose situation at this point. I had a technician that was complaining about a manager and a manager that was complaining about a technician. So I kind of took that situation and provided feedback to both. So my feedback to the manager was take the time to build a relationship with that person first. Obviously, we care about their performance in the workplace, but we also need to show this person that we care about them. We want them to be successful at this position. And then the other feedback that I provided was with that technician of like, I hear your frustrations, but here's some areas of concern that I'm having. And I brought a bullet point of a couple of things, and it wasn't everything that I had concerns with. It was just those top, what needs to change immediately? And obviously we can kind of shape from there, but I brought those two immediate concerns, and we pretty quickly saw some improvements across the board. But I think that really kind of shows the importance of both developing rapport with our team, and taking the time to provide that specific feedback of what needs to change. I don't know if that cued anybody else's kind of thoughts with feedback, or it could maybe be a situation that you maybe didn't know how to handle the feedback. Going once? Yeah.
I'll give you two sides of
Sure.
So I had a traumatic brain injury about a year and a half ago.
Sure.
And when I came back to my job, well, a new job, I realized that I was struggling with like timeliness,
Sure.
and things taking a long time to do, what I used to be able to do, right? And I had at the time a upper management that gave a lot of negative feedback. Like it was all negative. It was
Sure.
this, you gotta do this, you need to fix this, you need to hustle, you need, right? And it made me not want to do anything at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it made me just, my motivation was
Well, I think that's a really good example of like an aversive workplace environment. And in case anyone couldn't hear that, essentially it sounded like you had a traumatic brain injury, returned to the workplace, and there were day-to-day tasks that were just different or challenging at times, and your boss at the time handled it very punitively. So it kind of sounds like in that dynamic, they weren't striking a very good balance of positive feedback with constructive feedback.
Right. But then, that upper management got replaced by someone else.
Okay,
And that supervisor gave me lots of positive
sure,
things, like, this is what you're doing well. Yes, we still gotta work on this,
totally.
but like, you're doing these well. That's great. And it was all, it was, yes, I have things to work on, but it was like, you are doing well in these areas.
Sure.
And then suddenly it was different. I
Yeah.
wanted to do better. I tried harder. I put more time in.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. When I feel like it shows two very different leadership styles, I feel like, and then just to finish that story off, the second, that boss, our initial boss was replaced by a boss that utilized more reinforcement and reward-based strategies. So they were still providing that coaching and what you needed to improve upon, but they were still catching what you were doing well and reinforcing that. But I think that really shows two very different management styles and how that can affect our own behavior. Perfect. And I think we had another hand.
Very similar.
Yeah,
And it's like very simple. So we have to email our supervisor.
sure.
And his responses are not consistent. So sometimes you can get the supportive, encouraging one, and other times you get the critical, you're doing this wrong.
Sure.
There's no positive, in it. But for me, it almost paralyzes me because I never want to email him.
Sure.
Because I never know who I'm going to get.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. If you couldn't hear, essentially it sounds like a dynamic where sometimes you'll be responding via email and you'll get a response that might be reassuring or comforting, and then other times it might be more volatile or controversial. No, I feel like those are really good examples of one, taking the time to build that rapport. I feel like that second boss from the original story really took the time to build that rapport and that relationship building. It sounds like with the other situations that may have not been happening. Perfect. I appreciate you all sharing that. Another strategy in addition to feedback is the use of public posting. So this can be a little bit, I wouldn't say controversial, but very dependent on your workplace. It's been very effective in my own workplace, but research shows that utilizing public posting can lead to an increase in behavior pretty quickly. So it's a very research-based technique. It can be very advantageous for a team that maybe is underperforming. It makes data public. So essentially, rather than like us covertly taking data on something and keeping it kind of in between us and the person, we would collect that data and post it publicly where it's viewable to everyone. So everyone's quality or quantity or output of work is available. So in my clinic, I use public posting quite often. So I use it for my clinical level team for hitting billable hours. So there is a graph that I keep on my clinician door that logs how many hours a week that they have billed for. They have a billable expectation, and then it indicates if they are or are not hitting that. We also utilize that for completing feedback forms. So we have a monthly goal in my clinic that every employee gets one feedback form in writing. And basically, I have every employee listed out, and then we would initial off who did that feedback form. So this allows us to have some accountability. It has that visibility of we're all seeing this, and then we're working towards a shared goal. The other really big area that I use this for is note conversion. So I have an expectation that every end of week, my team has converted all of their notes so that we can submit and bill those to insurance. This is something that I'll discuss a little bit further later on, but this was a really big issue whenever I took over as site director. So utilizing public posting really made a big difference, plus reinforcement. So like I said, it promotes a sense of accountability and not wanting to let down the team. So we're all working towards the shared goal. Here are some visible or visual examples of how I use public posting. I'm gonna put on my little laser pointer. So over here, you can kind of see this is our parent meetings. We have a goal of once a month. Every parent has a meeting with that BCBA. So that's super important for parent involvement and buy-in. And it was something that was not always happening whenever I took over. It was something that sometimes fell between the cracks. We weren't always hitting that goal. So that was something I wanted to make sure that we were, addressing early on. So every BCBA has their caseload of clients listed out, and then they would check off once they met with a parent, and then it would be dated of when they met with them. The other thing that is also on here is my list of employees and when they got their feedback form. So I pulled this back in March, so it was earlier in the month, but basically we have that goal of if both of those plus billable hours are met for my clinical team, I buy lunch at the end of the month for them. And that's something that's super motivating for my team. We all talk about when the Qdoba Day is coming. And it might seem arbitrary, but it makes something that we have to do novel and fun and something that we can look forward to rather than something that's mundane and just, okay, we just got to keep going with the drudgery. So you can really utilize that to capitalize on that motivation. Another example of public posting, this is what I utilize in my team for note conversion. So as I was mentioning earlier, note conversion was a huge issue with my team. I'll touch a little bit more on this, but I divide my team. This was our silly groups. I divided everyone into canned goods. It was just something memorable, goofy, but everyone was categorized into a different canned good. And if their individual team, everyone had met their note conversion goal, then their team would be safe to earn whatever the reinforcer for that month is. And I let them select what their reinforcer is, either lunch or a t-shirt or whatever it might be. My team is very competitive, so utilizing group contingencies like this can be really motivating. Was basically like Survivor in my clinic for a little bit. They're very competitive. So that's something that works in my clinic, and that might be something that works in your own workplace. So this is something that if I have attempted some other strategies and I'm still not seeing improvement, behavior contracts and goal setting are kind of more of like the HR kind of approach, that if we've tried several other things and we're still not noting improvement, creating a behavior contract can really outline those specific expectations and set goals for that person. So when we're creating a behavior contract, we want to make sure that we're creating clear expectations. What is the behavior we want the person to do? What counts as the behavior and what doesn't? Reinforcement for meeting those goals, and consequences for not meeting those goals. And we want to make those very clear to that person to have set expectations. When creating a behavior contract, we would also want to have many conversations to try to teach preemptively. So behavior contracts are typically going to be utilized when teaching procedures have failed. I've tried to provide training, I've tried to provide feedback, and we're still not having success. Because we always want to attempt reinforcement and teaching first, because maybe that person truly doesn't know how to do this skill. When working with the individual, we want to make sure that we come to a shared understanding and an agreement on the following. What behavior are we seeking to reduce, increase, or modify in some way? So making sure that that person has a defined expectation and knows what is expected of them. When will they know the behavior has or has not happened? So that data collection component. And then how often do they need to do that skill? And setting a goal with a reinforcer in mind. So this kind of ties into, I'm sure some of you are probably, it sounds like a lot of educational background is what I'm hearing. So a lot of you are probably familiar with a SMART goal. So setting SMART goals with our behavior contracts can really be advantageous to addressing staff performance. So with a SMART goal, we want to make sure it is specific, it's measurable, it's achievable, it's relevant, and it's time-bound. So these are really all essential components when we're developing those goals with our team. We want to make sure they know what they're expected to do, so that's specific. Measurable, we can count when the behavior did or did not happen. Is it achievable? We don't want to ask our teammates to do something that's not even possible. Can they meet that deadline? Is that a reasonable expectation? Could I myself meet that deadline? Is it relevant to their work and their defined job expectation? And then it's time-bound. So we would want to have an expectation or a due date with this. So an example of a SMART goal, Kelly will complete all billing notes by the end of each day by 4:45. So that's specific, it's time-bound, it's achievable, and it's relevant to Kelly's work job or her role in her workplace. So now kind of taking everything we've discussed and kind of putting it into action. So first step whenever I am addressing a workplace problem, I want to identify the problem at hand. I want to define what the problem is, And this would allow you to set clear expectations of what we would like to address with this person. I want to develop a system for data collection to track progress or regression on the behavior or the skill of interest. I want to identify the function or the purpose of that behavior. I want to collaborate with that person to address the problem. And I want to develop a reinforcement contingency to either increase or decrease the behaviors or alternative that would be desirable in the workplace. So this is really a nice flow that we can kind of go to whenever we're having those issues of, have I went through all of these steps? Is there something I'm missing? So now we're going to break that into chunks. So identifying the problem, I feel like this is something sometimes we could do with our eyes closed. We know what the problems are in our workplace. You all listed out those problems very quickly of what your team might struggle with. So a lot of times we can figure out that without any sort of effort at all. And workplace performance problems, they're going to happen from time to time. I feel like a lot of times as managers, we try so hard to prevent any challenging behaviors or difficulties in the workplace, but that's just not feasible. Things are going to pop up from time to time. We're going to have teammates that need more training or need different kind of expectations or need more support. So it's important to be aware of problems or potential problems that might be developing. If we can catch problems early on, that makes it a lot easier to help down the road because it's not been going on for 6 months. It's been going on maybe a day or a few hours or whatever it might be. So after we've identified the problem, we want to define the problem. So coming up with a concrete definition of the behavior that we hope to change. So making sure this is, defined clearly so that you know what you're looking for and that person would know what's expected. If we're wanting to improve efficiency or response to emails, clocking in and out procedures, or anything in between, we must know what is and what's not the behavior. So being able to define that in measurable terms. Identify that function or the why. So this is a really important step that I feel like a lot of times that we miss. The function or the purpose of that person's behavior, this will really change how we respond to that behavior. So if the skill is something that the person does not know how to do, we need to teach. We need to go in and we need to train. If it's just something like they truly don't understand how to do this part of their job, it's our job as a manager to go in and provide additional training and support. If the behavior is something that the person's not motivated to do, that's totally different. They know how to do the skill, there's just lack of motivation. Then we want to reinforce and encourage it. This is where we'd have to figure out, do they not know or do they not want to? So those are two very different responses here. So that would change kind of our trajectory in this situation. So now that we can kind of understand the situation, let's use the example here of someone using their cell phone in the workplace. This is something that obviously they know not to do that, so then we would need to set a contingency of when it's appropriate to and when it's not appropriate to. If it is an issue of not replying to customer emails, that would be something that the person likely knows how to do, or maybe they're avoiding certain emails. So kind of leaning in and figuring out the why for that individual person. Reflect on the functions of behavior, which I'll go to on the next slide. If the behavior is identified to be maintained by escape or avoidance, a lot of times things that we're escaping or avoiding are the things that are hard. So something typically that we put off because it's challenging or difficult for us. And that's true for our staff too. They're probably not doing it because it's challenging. So that is whenever it's nice to use those task analyses and break it into smaller steps so that we can help the person be more successful. So just reiterating, I broke this into a different kind of view. Is it to get something? Are they trying to get a tangible item? So maybe a staff takes a long bathroom break to scroll social media on their phone. These behaviors allow the person to get access to preferred items. Is it to get attention from someone? So behaviors in this category allow the person to get positive or negative attention from others. So as an example I provided here, a staff steps away from their desk or frequently messages a colleague during work hours about tasks unrelated to work. So doing some of that water cooler talk or gossip in the workplace. Those behaviors are likely maintained to get attention or interaction from others. Escape or avoidance, I've touched on quite a bit. So the behaviors in this category occur so that the individual can leave or avoid doing an activity or work that they don't like. A lot of times those are the tasks that are hard for the person to do. We don't avoid things that we like doing, right? So a supervisor does not like to do payroll and work works on other tasks to postpone or procrastinate the task that they don't like. I'm continuously guilty of this myself. I will put off payroll until the last second because it takes a long time to do it. So this behavior allows the person to avoid or escape that task temporarily. And then automatic reinforcement. This category of behavior occurs because the behavior itself feels good to the person. A person is alone in their office and scratches a bug bite or their leg or picks at a cuticle. So those don't have a response from the environment. That just feels good for the person to do. So if we can think about the functions of behavior and keep in mind, is this something the person has been trained adequately and knows how to do, or if they're not motivated to do? The next step is collaboration. So being able to take the time to meet one-on-one with this person. And I think this goes hand in hand with that rapport building. So at this point in the problem solving, we've done observation, we've defined the behavior, we've collected data, and we've monitored the behavior that we seek to change. So this is when we take the time to sit down in a warm and welcoming way to first discuss the problem. So this is typically my first point of contact of, hey, I've noticed obstacles with X, Y, or Z, and I wanted to chat with you about this. Sometimes having this open conversation can fix a lot of problems just by bringing attention to it, right? They know that you as a manager are kind of watching out for this. You're looking for those behaviors to improve. And you can also take the time to goal set and create behavior contracts. Sometimes the person themselves can tell you what they need. You're like, hey, I'm seeing underperformance with you in this way. What kinds of things can I do to support you? So creating that environment where it's nurturing, supportive, and coaching can really be helpful. Now I'm going to kind of go into my own kind of study and put all of this into action. So like I said, I have been the site director in O'Fallon for 3 years. Prior to that, I was a BCBA with the company and worked under 2 different site directors. So I had kind of the opportunity to see different leadership styles and how prior bosses addressed challenges in the workplace. So like I mentioned earlier, note conversion was a notorious problem in my clinic. I had 50% or more of my staff members were months behind on notes. I had 2 staff members that had 45 or more sessions that were not converted. And this is a big deal because that is how we get reimbursed funds. So that is pretty devastating for a pretty small clinic at the time. We had, I think, when I started, 13 employees, so half had tons of notes that were not converted. So that was what I wanted to address first and foremost. So when I took over, that was our biggest outlier problem. So that was where I began. I created those group contingencies. I divided everyone into groups. And if we met that goal, we would get a reinforcer. It drastically changed sorry, I jumped ahead too quick. It drastically improved our note conversion. Now that we've been doing this about 3 years, I've had a couple of people not meet the goal, but it's typically one person didn't have 1 session. So it's a very, very big difference to those 45 sessions for multiple people. Another example that I wanted to provide with that group contingency and reinforcement. So I divided everyone into 4, and we talked about that. Some potential motivators that could be motivating. I talked about the catered lunch. Pajama day, I did a sweatpants week. So there's some things that you can do that also aren't expensive that could be motivating your team. We use Teams a lot to chat within our agency. I use the polls feature on that to kind of gauge preferences and allow everyone to kind of vote for what they find the most motivating. With this motivator, I try to have it clear on what is expected for everyone. So notes are checked every Friday at 4:45. Everyone knows that that's when they're due. I have made that expectation clear. I have it publicly posted in the hallway. We talk about it all of the time. So setting that clear expectation so what people know when they need to have things done by. And then if everyone meets that contingency in that group, then they would receive their designated motivator. I've also utilized this for similar contingencies in my team as well. So not only for my technician level staff, but I've also used this for my BCBA level staff. So some obstacles that I noted whenever I took over, parent involvement was a lot lower than I wanted to see it. We were having parent meetings, but it was every 2, every 3 months, maybe twice a year. That's just not an adequate amount. So that was something that I noticed. I wanted to see some improvement with and really involve our parents more often. So I made that expectation of parents come in at least once a month for a parent meeting, and added in meeting those billable hours and providing written feedback. But I didn't do that all in 1 month. I started with one goal. We had that one expectation. Once we started meeting that, then I added another expectation. We have to meet both of these things. And then I added in a third one. And I don't think that they've missed any since I've done this 2 years ago. So I think it really shows you the public posting, plus use of reinforcement, and setting clear expectations can really make a big impact. And I think compared to some of our other sites, we have 100% parent involvement rate, which our other sites are working on improving that, but we have variable levels of that across sites. So 100% is definitely a great goal to have in mind. So kind of looking at wrapping up here, I want to reiterate some important things. So reinforcement increases desired workplace behaviors. Creating a task analysis can help train new and existing staff on how to do larger or more challenging tasks by making it simplified and a step-by-step process. Feedback shapes performance by telling the person what behaviors you want to continue seeing and what behaviors you do not want to see in the workplace. Other strategies and techniques, so I guess keeping in mind what strategies or techniques could you envision using with your own team? Yeah,
We do some of these for sure.
perfect.
We use our the poly to do like figuring out what poly.
Sure. Yeah, so
We could probably be more detailed with it, but like we do some of that.
yeah, and I think a lot of times with motivation, I think a lot of times it's that specific piece that's sometimes missed in the individualization. Like our company as a whole utilizes a recognition website, and the nice thing about that is it can really be individualized. People can send basically points to other people for specific workplace behaviors and tie it to our company's core values. So that one inherently can be individualized, which is great. Any other kind of strategies that you all could envision?
I like the small group contingent.
Yeah. And, yeah, that one has been a really big impact in my team. We have a very competitive group of people. We're talking about doing an O'Fallon Olympics because they're, like I said, a very competitive group of people. But I think you can almost feel like I've done it two ways. So I've done individual contingencies with my team, and it was more effective to have people in small groups. Because if they dropped the ball, they felt like they disappointed their coworker rather than just themselves. So I've played with both, and that was definitely more effective in my own clinic. Perfect. Any questions from anyone? Comments? Concerns? Yeah.
On that same topic, so in my own home, I have like a program that basically we gamify all the chores,
Yeah.
right? So whoever gets the most points, they can do it by certain things. Do you think something like that would work in the workplace as well?
Yeah, let me repeat what your question was. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you have any ideas of like programs you could do?
Totally. So just to repeat that in case anyone didn't hear that, essentially she was saying that in her own home, she has gamified or made chores fun at home. So they would gain, like I'm assuming your children and spouse would gain points for, doing the daily chores. I absolutely think that can be used in the workplace. I think the biggest things that I would say is start small. Like what needs to be fixed immediately. And kind of identifying those. Because if we go too big too quickly, we're going to lose people's motivation very quickly. As far as like systems go, I've really just like kind of created my own thing individually. I do a lot of like kind of visuals that I'll put out in the hallway so that people are frequently passing them when they see them. I'm implementing a new one that will be kind of targeting like workplace chores, just to kind of address some of those, but it's going to be tied to like specific clients and like what would be expected with those individual kids, but really iterating that being specific. Cool. Any other questions? I think I saw you. I think I saw her in the black first, then I'll get you next. Go ahead.
I guess it's kind of a two-part question.
Sure.
We're a little bit restricted with financial
Totally.
incentives, so we talk to the people that I supervise students. So like one thing that we tried considering was negative reinforcement. They
Okay.
were like, well, we get by stuff, and can we like get out of stuff? Like as reinforcement, which I was kind of open to, but then as we tried it, it wasn't super like the things that they wanted to get out of, like they had to do. So it was like,
Totally.
you have to attend this thing, you have to. So have you had any success? And then kind of the second part is if you do have like financial restrictions, what are some?
Yeah, I think those are great questions. So just to reiterate that, two-part question. The first one was utilizing negative reinforcement, so allowing the person to get out of tasks they don't like. And then the second question was looking at using motivation when funds or financial restrictions are in place. I work at a nonprofit, so I completely understand, like, we do not always have tons and tons of money to throw at things. So I think I'll answer that part first, then I can go into the negative reinforcement. So I think being creative with it and kind of what is something that I can do that would be unique in my workplace. So like, a pajama day or a sweatpants day, like things like that, can be really valuable. I even did like a potluck day, so staff that wanted to could bring in, cookies and snacks and those things. Something else that I did that was no cost, they all wanted to work for a cookie competition. So anyone that wanted to participate could bake off, 24 cookies of their favorite recipe, and then we did a Great British Bake Off style competition to blind taste test, and the staff loved it. They thought it was so fun. It didn't cost us any money, and they were talking about it months later. So I think being creative and looking at what is something that would be motivating. Sometimes even just asking your team of what's something that you guys would think would be fun to do, or what's something different that we could do. And a lot of times they'll actually have ideas that you're like, I had not thought about that. Let's do that. And then as far as negative reinforcement can be equally as motivating. The only thing I think to be cognizant of is I would say what types of aversive things we're using. Obviously, sometimes providing weekly coaching with a staff that's underperforming, that might be something that might even just be required by HR. But I think you could even select you want maybe a longer lunch break, or you want to be able to leave 10 minutes earlier after a session on Friday, or whatever. I think just setting clear expectations of what things we could let the person get out of, and kind of making that specific. Because obviously there's some aspects of our job that we might not like, but we can't inherently get out of those. Perfect. And then I think you were next, right?
You guys have kind of mostly answered part of my question, but I would say, do you have any ideas about mostly online or?
Yeah. Just to repeat your question. So question about working mostly online. I think working online can definitely present its own set of challenges. I think the biggest would be with rapport building, because obviously working remote and not maybe seeing face to face, your relationship with that person can very quickly only become about work, which I think can kind of damage that rapport that we really want to build with our team. So I think making sure that you're carving out time for getting to know your team, fun. So something that we at my agency have kind of noticed is an issue. So we have all clinic meetings. So we will come together typically every 3 months, and we will do a team meeting with all of the clinics and all of the supervisory level staff. Engagement was really low in those meetings for a while. So one of my suggestions to our chief was, hey, can we carve out 5 minutes at the beginning just for something silly and fun and engaging? So I came up with a trivia, a rapid fire 5-minute trivia. People loved it, and with a winning clinic, she bought them Starbucks or something. People were I had a picture of Argentina on the screen without it being labeled, and just rapid fire going through it. So I think things like that can be really nice ways to make connection. And I think even sometimes just looking at tech companies, since there are a lot of remote. I have a friend that works for an app, and she's telling me all the time of things that company will do to facilitate rapport and relationship building. So I think a lot of times there can be more out there than maybe we wouldn't even think of ourselves. Any other questions, comments? Bless you. Yes.
I was wondering when we were talking about
Yeah.
Did you give consideration as to who you put together, or was it random?
What a great question. So I've done it both ways. So I have went in and cherry picked my team. Like if I was kind of trying to use like a model kind of situation, like where I put a senior technician with maybe a new technician, I would maybe take that into mind. A lot of times I will I found a website that will like generate small groups, and I put everyone on my team into it. And I've done it that way. So I kind of try to be flexible with it. But I think it could really depend on like your individual team. Because sometimes like you have those leaders in your team, so capitalize on that.
Yeah, I see it going
Yeah,
both ways almost though, like, if you're pairing like, experienced hygiene with somebody who's new who needs a little improvement, maybe they'll help balance this out.
sure.
Or maybe they won't get balanced out and then your hygiene is getting frustrated.
100%. But I think having those open discussions. So I had a teammate, like you're saying, that has been with the company for quite some time. They always are meeting their expectations and their deadlines. But they kind of took it as a learning opportunity to kind of coach that person. And I think a lot of it comes into really fostering that culture of support. So I was closing the clinic, it's Tuesday, I was closing yesterday, and I had a new hire start, and it was her first session alone with a client. And without prompting or without being asked, I had another technician that was hand-holding her through a process. So if you really take the time to develop that supportive environment, I think it honestly in the end can kind of make your job easier because you can be there to support and guide, but other teammates will start to kind of support and guide one another. So I think if we capitalize that and really utilize that reinforcement, it can kind of be motivating. You could even look at making like a team lead for your individual teams of like, hey, this is my senior person on this team. This is going to be your kind of role to like coach and support and guide these people through that. Cool. Any other questions? Going once, going twice, sold. Well, if you guys don't have any other questions, I will just give my ending statement and thank you for your time. But by applying ABA strategies and staff management, we can create a supportive and productive work environment where employees feel valued and motivated to perform their best. I appreciate all of your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.